When the power grid failed across Texas in February 2021, millions of Americans discovered something about modern life that survivalists and historians have understood for generations. The systems we trust completely can vanish in hours. And when they do, human behavior follows patterns that are older than any nation or technology. I have spent 3 decades studying the economics of collapse, from the fall of empires to the bank runs of the Great Depression, from the riots that followed Hurricane Katrina to the supply chain breakdowns during the pandemic years. And one truth appears again and again in the historical record with the clarity of a bell in an empty church. When crisis comes, most people run to the same places, and those places become death traps. This is not theory or speculation, but documented reality, visible in police reports, in survivor testimonies, in the ruins of cities that believed they were too modern or too civilized to experience true breakdown. Today we are going to examine 10 locations that Americans instinctively seek out during emergencies. Places that seem safe because they are familiar, because they represent order and abundance in normal times, but which transform into kill zones when the systems supporting them collapse. Before we go further, I need you to do something important. Stay with me through this entire analysis, because understanding why these places fail is more valuable than any stockpile of goods. And when we are done, I want you to comment below and tell me where you are watching from, what city and country, because this knowledge matters everywhere, but the details change by region. The place we will focus on most intensely, the one I am calling number 3 in this count, is a location that nearly every American family visits weekly. A place so woven into the fabric of suburban life that most people cannot imagine it as anything other than safe. And that psychological blind spot has killed more people in historical collapses than most. Causes of death that make the evening news. Let me start by addressing the fundamental psychology that governs human behavior when normalcy breaks down. Because if you understand this mechanism, you will recognize it in yourself and in the crowds around you. And that recognition can save your life. The human brain is designed by evolution to seek the familiar during stress, to run toward light and crowds and recognized symbols. Because for most of our species' history, that was a sound survival strategy. The campfire meant safety. The crowd meant protection. The familiar meant home. But in a modern collapse scenario, these instincts backfire catastrophically, because the places that represent safety and abundance and stable times become magnets for desperate crowds, and crowds in crisis situations exhibit predictable behaviors that security professionals and military planners study carefully. During the Los Angeles riots of 1992, the stores that were looted first were not random. They were the large, well-lit, heavily stocked locations that everyone in the neighborhood knew about, the places where normalcy had always been purchased. The same pattern appeared during Hurricane Katrina, when the Superdome, intended as a refuge, became a nightmare of overcrowding and violence because too many people followed the same official guidance to the same location. I watched similar dynamics unfold during the early pandemic panic of 2020, when grocery stores became flashpoints of conflict over toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Trivial goods that people fought over because the stores themselves represented the illusion that civilization was still functioning. The tactical reality is straightforward. Any location that attracts a large crowd in a crisis will experience rapid depletion of resources, escalating tension as scarcity becomes obvious, and eventual violence as the desperate outnumber the prepared. This is not cynicism about human nature, but observable fact, documented in every major American emergency of the last century. The spiritual dimension here matters too, and I say this as someone who has interviewed survivors of economic collapses in Argentina, Venezuela, and the former Yugoslavia. The people who survived with their humanity intact were those who made decisions based on clear-sighted assessment, rather than fear, who understood that God gave us minds capable of reason, and that panic is the abandonment of that gift. The first location on our list is the big box retail store, the massive Walmart or Costco that anchors suburban commercial districts across America. And if you think carefully about the last time you visited one, you will understand immediately why these become traps. These stores are designed for efficiency and stable times: wide aisles for cart traffic, limited exits for theft prevention, high ceilings and open sightlines for security monitoring, and centralized inventory systems that depend entirely on functioning supply chains and electronic payment networks. When those systems fail, the design that makes these stores profitable makes them deadly. Consider what happened in the early hours of Black Friday sales over the years. Those carefully documented cases where crowds trampled employees and customers in the rush for discounted televisions and toys. Now imagine that same psychology multiplied by genuine fear, by the knowledge that the trucks are not coming tomorrow, by the understanding that this might be the last chance to get food or water. The historical record from Argentina's economic collapse in 2001 shows us exactly what happens. Supermarkets were looted not by organized criminals but by ordinary middle-class families who had never committed a crime in their lives, people who simply made the calculation that their children's hunger mattered more than property rights. The stores with the biggest signs were hit first and hit hardest because they were the most visible targets. Now add to this the tactical problem of the physical space itself. Long aisles create fatal funnels where crowds compress. Limited exits mean that when panic starts, everyone is pushing toward the same 2 or 3 doors. And the high ceilings and hard floors create acoustic environments where a single gunshot or the crash of a falling shelf sounds like an explosion and triggers stampedes. If you are inside one of these stores when the lights go out, either from grid failure or from looters cutting power, you are in a warehouse-sized maze with hundreds of panicked strangers, no way to know where the threats are coming from, and a very limited number of escape routes that everyone else is also trying to reach. The better approach is obvious once you think it through: maintain supplies at home before the crisis. Shop at smaller and less obvious locations during the early stages of instability. And understand that the moment you see crowds forming at the big stores, it is already too late to join them safely. The second location that kills people reliably in collapse scenarios is the gas station, particularly the large travel plazas at highway intersections. And Americans have a special vulnerability here because our infrastructure was built around the assumption of personal vehicle transportation and cheap, abundant fuel. Every evacuation in modern American history has produced the same images: endless lines of cars at gas stations, frustrated people honking and arguing, fistfights breaking out over who was in line first, and eventually empty pumps while desperate people are still waiting. This happened during the evacuations before Hurricane Rita in 2005, when the roads out of Houston became parking lots and people ran out of gas while sitting in traffic, stranded between cities with no fuel and no way forward. It happened again during Hurricane Irma in 2017, when gas stations across Florida ran dry and people who had waited to evacuate found themselves trapped. The dynamics here are straightforward. Gas stations operate on just-in-time delivery systems with underground tanks that hold maybe 2 or 3 days of normal traffic volume, and in a crisis situation that inventory disappears in hours. The station itself becomes a choke point where everyone traveling a particular route must stop, which means criminals and desperate people know exactly where to find targets. The physical environment is dangerous in ways most people never consider: underground tanks full of flammable liquid, electrical systems that can spark, often inadequate lighting once power fails, and typically only 1 or 2 attendants who have no capacity to control a crowd and will simply abandon the location when things deteriorate. I have reviewed incident reports from sociologists who studied the 1970s gas lines during the oil embargo, and the consistent finding was that violence escalated in direct proportion to wait time. The longer people sat in line watching the pump, the more likely they were to interpret any perceived cutting or unfairness as an existential threat worth fighting over. The lesson is simple and should be drilled into anyone responsible for family safety: keep your vehicle tank above half at all times during periods of instability. Store fuel safely at home if local regulations permit, and if evacuation becomes necessary, leave early before the crowds understand what is happening, because the window between maybe we should go and the roads are impassable is often less than 6 hours. The people who survive evacuations are not the ones with the biggest vehicles or the most money, but the ones who made the decision earliest and took back roads that others did not think of. Now I need to foreshadow something before we go further into this list, because the location I am calling number 3 is different from the others in an important way that we will explore deeply when we get there. It is not just a tactical trap, but a psychological and spiritual one. A place that represents something fundamental about American life in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. And understanding why that place fails tells us something important about what we have become as a culture. When we reach that discussion, you will recognize the location immediately, and you will probably feel uncomfortable, because you have taken your family there hundreds of times. You have thought of it as safe and normal and perhaps even pleasant. And confronting the reality of what it becomes in a crisis requires letting go of assumptions that are deeply embedded in how we think about daily life. But first, we need to discuss 2 more locations that demonstrate the same principle from different angles: the instinct to run toward official authority and medical infrastructure. The 4th location that people seek out, and the 4th place you should avoid, is the hospital or emergency room. And this surprises many people because we are trained from childhood to think of hospitals as sanctuaries where help is always available. That assumption is true in normal times when the system is functioning within its designed capacity. But hospitals operate on the same just-in-time principles as every other modern institution. They keep minimal stocks of supplies, they staff for predictable patient loads, and their entire operational model assumes functioning supply chains, electrical grids, and pharmaceutical distribution networks. When those systems fail, hospitals do not become fortresses of care, but triage zones where resources are rationed strictly. The medical professionals working in those facilities face impossible ethical decisions about who receives care and who does not. And if you arrive with an injury or illness that is not immediately life-threatening, you will simply be turned away or left waiting indefinitely while critical cases are handled. I have read first-hand accounts from doctors who worked during Hurricane Katrina, when hospitals in New Orleans lost power and running water. And the descriptions are nightmarish: patients dying not from their original conditions but from heat and dehydration, no way to sterilize equipment, medical staff making decisions about which patients to evacuate and which to leave behind. The hospitals became concentration points for disease because sick people gathered there without adequate sanitation. And the security situations deteriorated as family members of patients grew desperate and demanding. During the early pandemic period, hospitals again became danger zones, not because of malice but because of system overload. People avoided necessary care because they feared exposure, while others flooded emergency rooms with non-emergency conditions out of panic. The tactical problem of using a hospital as a hiding place is that you have no control over who else is there, no ability to leave quickly if the situation deteriorates, and you are in a building full of sick people during a period when sanitation and medical supplies are already compromised. The alternative approach that our ancestors understood is basic medical knowledge at the household level, knowing how to treat common injuries, how to recognize serious conditions early, how to use traditional remedies for minor ailments, and most importantly, how to prevent injuries through situational awareness. The people who did best medically during historical collapses were not the ones who had access to hospitals, but the ones who had practical knowledge and avoided needing acute care in the first place. The fifth location is police stations and obvious government buildings, and here the psychology is similar to hospitals. People assume that concentrations of official authority equal safety and order. This assumption is dangerously wrong in collapse scenarios for several reasons that historians and military analysts understand well. First, in the early stages of civil unrest or economic collapse, government buildings often become targets of protest or attack because they are symbols of the system that failed, and being near them means being near flashpoints of violence. Second, even when government buildings remain secure, the people inside those buildings are focused on maintaining government function and establishing order, not on providing sanctuary to civilians who show up seeking help. Police stations in particular have limited space and resources, and during a crisis they become command posts from which officers are deployed outward. They are not refugee centers. Third, and this is something that Americans trained to respect authority often fail to consider, during periods of martial law or emergency powers, concentrations of government force can become places where civil liberties are suspended and people are detained rather than helped. I am not suggesting that government is inherently hostile to citizens, but I am observing the historical reality that emergency powers bring out authoritarian reflexes, and being inside a government facility during that transition means being subject to whatever rules are imposed without the ability to leave freely. During Hurricane Katrina, law enforcement in New Orleans was overwhelmed and in some cases became part of the problem rather than the solution, with documented cases of excessive force and unlawful detention. During the 1992 Los Angeles riots, police pulled back from large areas entirely, leaving residents to defend themselves while government buildings remained fortified islands. The better strategy is to maintain respectful distance from concentrations of official power while knowing their locations and being able to coordinate when appropriate. But your primary security needs to come from household and neighborhood level preparedness, from trusted relationships with people you know personally, not from hope that authorities will protect you. This is consistent with American founding principles that understood government as a necessary structure but individual and community responsibility as the foundation of real security. We have examined 5 locations so far, and the pattern should be clear by now. The places Americans are trained to think of as safe are optimized for stability and abundance, not for resilience under stress, and in every case the better alternative involves thinking ahead, avoiding crowds, and taking responsibility for your own welfare rather than assuming institutions will function when you need them. In the second part of this analysis, we will examine the remaining 5 locations, including the critical discussion of number 3, and we will talk about what genuine preparedness looks like, not as hoarding or paranoia, but as the practical application of historical wisdom to contemporary life. The people who navigate crises successfully are not necessarily the strongest or the richest, but the ones who understand patterns, who can set aside comforting illusions and see clearly what is actually happening, and who make decisions based on principles rather than panic. That capacity is available to anyone willing to study how systems fail and how humans behave under pressure. And it is knowledge that becomes more valuable every year as our systems become more complex and more fragile simultaneously. We left off examining the first 5 deadly hiding spots in a collapse of big box stores where abundance turns to anarchy, the gas stations where escape routes become choke points, the hospitals overwhelmed beyond triage, the police stations that prioritize order over sanctuary, and government buildings that draw fire from the desperate. These patterns are not hypothetical but etched in the historical record of American crises. From the Great Depression bank runs that saw crowds besieging Federal Reserve buildings in vain to the post-9/11 evacuations where transit hubs became traps of confusion and fear. The common thread running through them is the human instinct to seek familiar symbols of stability. But stability is an illusion sustained by fragile systems of electricity, supply chains, and law enforcement. Systems that historians like me have seen fail repeatedly across civilizations from Rome to modern Venezuela. As we move into the remaining 5 locations, remember that true preparedness begins with recognizing these instincts in yourself and choosing differently, drawing on the self-reliance that built this nation rather than the dependency that modern convenience has fostered. What follows will challenge some of your deepest assumptions about safety, especially when we reach number 3. And the principles we uncover here apply not just to distant crises but to the economic pressures building in America today. Rising debt levels reminiscent of the 1929 crash, supply vulnerabilities exposed by the 2021 Suez Canal blockage and ongoing chip shortages, and social fractures visible in every protest turned riot since 2020. These are not predictions of doom but observations grounded in data from the Federal Reserve's own reports on household debt surpassing 100% of GDP and analyses from the Club of Rome on how inequality accelerates regional collapses, patterns that echo the fall of the Roman Empire when urban breadbasket subsidies collapsed under fiscal strain. The 6th location people flock to is the crowded city shelter or stadium designated as an official relief point. And this choice stems from a deep-seated trust in government announcements that promise cots, food distribution, and safety in numbers. During Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the Superdome in New Orleans became the archetype of this failure. Tens of thousands gathered expecting aid, but instead found sweltering heat without air conditioning after power failed, overflowing toilets leading to disease outbreaks like cholera-like symptoms from contaminated water, and escalating violence including assaults and rapes documented in congressional reports and survivor accounts compiled by the Government Accountability Office. The stadium's design, meant for sports spectacles, amplified the problem's vast open spaces with poor ventilation trapped heat and odors. Limited entry points created bottlenecks for both arrival and evacuation, and the concentration of vulnerable populations including the elderly, children, and infirm made it a predation ground for those willing to exploit chaos. Similar dynamics played out at the Houston Astrodome during the same storm and during the 2017 Puerto Rico hurricane aftermath, where shelters intended for relief devolved into sites of theft and infighting over rations, as detailed in FEMA's own after-action reviews. Tactically, these places strip away your autonomy. You surrender control over food, movement, and even family proximity to bureaucratic schedules and armed guards enforcing order. And in extended crises like the multi-week blackouts, rations dwindle while rumors spread unchecked, turning shared misery into mob panic. Psychologically, the crowd mentality reinforces itself. Arriving and seeing thousands others quiets the inner voice urging you to turn back. But this is precisely the trap our ancestors avoided by scattering rather than massing. The better path, proven in rural American responses to blizzards and floods, is leveraging smaller community networks, church basements with known leadership, neighborhood homes with reinforced doors, or mutual aid groups formed in advance, where trust already exists and resources are pooled without the spectacle of desperation. This aligns with the homesteading traditions of early American settlers who understood that collective strength comes from dispersed resilience, not centralized vulnerability. Number 7 on the list is public transit hubs, bus stations, train depots, subway entrances, and these draw people because they promise mobility, the great American dream of getting out before it's too late. Yet in every major urban evacuation, these hubs become immobile graveyards of hope. During the 2003 Northeast blackout affecting 50 million people across 8 states, subway systems in New York trapped thousands underground in stifling darkness, with ventilation failing and panic leading to injuries from falls and crushes. As recounted in the final report by the US-Canada Power System Outage Task Force, subway stations, with their enclosed platforms and single exits, amplify risks from smoke, toxic gases released by stalled trains, or even deliberate sabotage, while surface-level bus and train depots clog with people abandoning vehicles to wait for non-existent departures. The 2011 London riots saw King's Cross Station become a flashpoint where fleeing crowds overwhelmed platforms, leading to stampedes and arson attempts. And closer to home, the 2020 George Floyd unrest closed major transit points in Minneapolis, stranding riders amid looting just blocks away. Economically, these hubs rely on electronic ticketing and schedules that evaporate without power or fuel, turning potential escape routes into holding pens where you burn calories waiting while predators assess the crowd. In a future collapse mirroring the hyperinflation scenarios studied in Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe's 2008 crisis, where transportation fuel became unobtainable for civilians, standing in these lines marks you as mobile but fuel-less, a target for theft of whatever you carry. The strategic alternative is early departure using personal means, bicycles for urban escape, or pre-mapped walking routes through industrial zones avoided by crowds. Principles drawn from military evasion tactics in Vietnam War memoirs, like those of Medal of Honor recipient Gary Wetzel, who emphasized terrain knowledge over reliance on supply lines. Americans today, with our car culture, must relearn foot mobility, stocking sturdy shoes and light packs, as our forebears did during the Dust Bowl migrations documented in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. grounded in real Federal Writers Project interviews. Hey folks, if this analysis is hitting home and sharpening your thinking on real preparedness, do me a favor, hit that like button to share this hard truth with your network. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's lessons for today. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, your city and country, because seeing this map out globally motivates me to keep delivering. Your engagement keeps these videos reaching those who need them most. Moving to number 8. Banks and ATMs lure people with the primal urge to secure paper money before digital systems freeze, but this instinct dooms you in the opening hours of financial panic. The Great Depression's bank runs of 1930 to 1933 saw thousands besiege institutions like New York's Bank of United States, where crowds grew violent as tellers shuttered windows and police formed lines, leading to injuries and suicides amid rumors of insolvency, as chronicled in John Kenneth Galbraith's The Great Crash, 1929. Modern ATMs compound the danger, concentrated locations known to all, with lines forming instantly as cash withdrawals are limited to $200 to $500 per person before machines empty, telegraphing to observers who has resources worth robbing. During the 2014 Ferguson unrest, ATMs were smashed and looted not for the machines but for the people queued there, vulnerable with cash in hand. And in Cyprus's 2013 bailout crisis, capital controls trapped depositors in lines while thieves targeted those carrying withdrawals home. In our current U.S. context, with national debt at $36 trillion per Treasury data and commercial real estate vacancies signaling banking stress akin to the 1980s S&L crisis, a trigger like a cyber attack on Swift simulated in exercises like Quantum Dawn would replicate this chaos. Banks are fortified against theft but not mobs, and once power fails, vaults lock automatically with no manual override for civilians. The financially astute survive by diversifying pre-crisis, small cash stashes and fireproof safes, barter goods like ammunition or medical supplies valued higher than dollars in Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, where a loaf cost billions, and skills like basic leechcraft for wound care using historical remedies from Civil War field manuals, sucking venom or bloodletting with sterilized tools when antibiotics vanished. Finance teaches that liquidity is king early, but in week 2, tangibles rule lessons from the Argentine 2001 Carolito where peso devaluation wiped savings, forcing barters in rural markets. Number 9. Rooftops in dense urban areas. Appeals to the survival trope of high ground for visibility and defense, but this exposes you to realities overlooked in movies. During the 1992 Los Angeles riots, some residents climbed apartment roofs only to face arson fires spreading upward, heat rising, and no water access as sprinklers failed without pressure, per LAPD after-action reports. Wind-whipped flames, sniper fire from streets below, and hypothermia from exposure turned vantage points into perches without escapes. Structurally, many urban roofs fail under group weight, as seen in the 1945 Empire State Building plane crash, where fire ladders couldn't reach. In blackout scenarios like New York's 1977 event, looters used adjacent buildings to access elevated positions undetected. Future grid-down events projected in MIT's The Collapse is Coming analysis tying energy fragility to societal breakdown, would exacerbate this with no emergency services climbing stairs in multi-hundred-floor skyscrapers. Better is mid-level concealment with multiple egresses like second-floor apartments with fire escapes and alley views, echoing World War II London blitz shelter strategies in Winston Churchill's War Cabinet minutes favoring dispersed basements over exposed heights. Finally, number 10. Your own unsecured home in a visible, crowded neighborhood feels safest because it's yours, but visibility and familiarity make it a beacon. Neighbors know your routines. Your visible generator hum or stocked garage from past conversations advertises resources, and fixed locations lack evasion options. In Katrina's aftermath, homes in gentrifying areas were stripped bare while rural outskirts fared better, per Army Corps' levee failure studies. The 2020 wildfires saw looted evacuated homes in California suburbs, as documented in CAL FIRE incident logs. To fortify without advertising, blend in neutral curtains. No overflowing trash signaling food stores, community watches over isolation. Now we reach the heart of this analysis, the twist that redefines everything. Number 3. Suburban shopping malls and major commercial centers. The place Americans pilgrimage to weekly, mistaking consumerism's temple for sanctuary. Why do we choose it? Conditioning from childhood: climate control, food courts blending fast abundance, security patrols, familiar layouts where families bond over pretzels and sales, brands promise normalcy, echoing the Roman Forum's social role before bread riots. But in collapse, it becomes a predator's arena, multiple unsecured doors, service tunnels for ingress, power loss, plunging acres into darkness where skylights offer faint outlines for ambushes. The 1992 riots saw malls like Beverly Center contested battlegrounds, while Black Friday stampedes at Walmart in 2008 killed workers, scaled up in crises. This is the Tenku twist. Malls embody our prosperity illusion. The post-World War II suburban dream critiqued in The Affluent Society by Galbraith, where private opulence masks public fragility. In economic freefall like 2008's Lehman collapse rippling to today's CRE crisis, malls concentrate desperation, teens unemployed, migrants eyeing goods. Psychologically, lingering denies reality, trading vigilance for nostalgia. Historically, Constantinople's 1453 markets fell to Ottoman forces hiding among crowds. Spiritually, its stewardship, failure family protection demands pivoting from comfort to cover. Alternatives, early exit to wooded edges, rural caches, small-town grocers,